So the reason that the next few months are going to be so painful, if you're a Philadelphia sports fan, is that the Sixers, on one hand, are going nowhere, and they're going nowhere fast. And why are they going nowhere fast? Because Joel Embiid's knee is done. It is over. It is dead. Joel Embiid's knee needs significant work. Presumably, it needs legitimate surgery. That's where we're going to end up at with Joel Embiid. Now, we've talked about this on this show for weeks, if not months, if not the better part of a year. The real issue with Joel Embiid's knee can be traced all the way back to the Olympics. If you remember, he looked great going into Olympic camp. Somewhere along the lines at the Olympics, he looked plodding. He never really looked particularly good when he was in games, so much so that you had the national media pundits who, typically are a little bit iffy, right? They're a little bit iffy on Joel Embiid relative to like Nikola Jokic and other MVP candidates. But people were really piling on Embiid at the Olympics and was like, he looks like he's plodding. He looks like the footwork's not there. It looks like the speed is gone. He just doesn't look like himself. He had the one game against Serbia, which really was his only true use in the Olympics, which was to neutralize Nikola Jokic. And in fairness, he did exactly what he was supposed to do. And yet, you run into a significant issue if you are a Joel Embiid supporter, which is in the Olympics, it would appear as though some point he hurt his knee. And there's no getting around it at this point because, go back to the beginning of the regular season, the Sixers said there was a plan, there was a ramp-up plan, but he wasn't hurt, which never made sense. It's very clear that they've done a whole hell of a lot of half measures. They didn't want him to have to go under the knife again. They just went and signed Paul George in the offseason. The idea was to let those two, along with Tyrese Maxey, take this team into the playoffs and, preferably to the promised land. However, it hasn't worked. Whatever half measures the Sixers tried to put in, and in fairness, that could also have something to do with what Joel Embiid wanted. I'm not saying that this is specifically and solely from the team. You would have to imagine that Joel Embiid's camp and the team together had to come up with some sort of a decision. The problem that you're going to run into here is that Embiid has never looked right this season. And it doesn't feel like at any point he's going to look like that MVP candidate, at least this year. There is a chance that down the line we could have a significant, issue if they do put him under the knife again and it doesn't work. But here's what Shams reported over the weekend because it was a legitimate issue. This was a legitimate problem. And again, it kind of confirms what Ramona Shelbourne had put out during the Sixers-Bucks game. It was this. The Sixers and Joel Embiid are consulting doctors and considering alternative options on his injured knee, sources tell ESPN. Sides have hoped for progress in Embiid's body, but his efforts to play and current treatments, including injections, have not provided any improvement. So now you end up in a really weird scenario if you're the Sixers because, remember, there was an extension handed out, and I would say that it was, I don't know. Like, if it's me, and I'm looking at Joel Embiid, and I'm looking at what Joel Embiid is supposed to be, the guy that you've gotten this season is not that Joel Embiid. Your only chance of winning a championship right now is to have MVP candidate Joel Embiid. Now, Tyrese Maxey can take you to the playoffs. I would be confident that if the Sixers were to somehow send out this Joel Embiid, who, again, you signed to a 3-year extension before you needed to, if you were to just somehow offload Joel Embiid and then presumably probably also offload Paul George, then yeah, like we could go back to you could go back to Tyrese Maxey and say, all right, if you build a team around Tyrese Maxey, is it a playoff team? Yes, I think Tyrese Maxey is good enough to take you to the playoffs. Is he good enough to take you to a championship on his own? No. And in fairness, there are very few players in this league who can get the job done on their own. I can't even think of a guy who on his own could win a title. Jokic doesn't do it on his own. He might be the closest thing to it. There's nobody in this league that is so head and shoulders above the rest that you can surround him with Garbaggio and he can still take you to the finals. Here's where I'll give LeBron credit. Early in his career, LeBron on a Cavs team that was certainly not rife with talent, he was able to take to a finals. I don't think that in the current landscape of the NBA, you have a guy who can do that. And if I'm wrong, by all means, let me know in the comments. I would love to know who is the player that is in this league right now that could single-handedly take a team to the promised land. I don't think the guy exists. I don't think that player is currently in the NBA. And in fairness, I don't think you have a generational talent coming up in the next draft that's going to be able to do that. Cooper Flagg looks like a really good player, and if the gods be good and want to help, restore some order to the process, it would be nice to have the Sixers get a little bit of lottery luck, maybe jump up to number one, get Cooper Flagg, and then you have a guy who could play with Tyrese Maxey. That'd be a very good fit. And maybe that's what you try to turn the page to down the road. But they don't have it right now. They don't, right now, if you're the Sixers, you have Tyrese Maxey, you have a bunch of role players that you signed in the offseason, you have Paul George, who has not worked out. I would not be shocked if this offseason Paul George is moved. Truthfully, I would not be surprised if we get to a point in the offseason. Paul George will still have interest out there from other teams on the trade market who will be willing to look past the injury issues. To me, I think that there's a better than zero chance that the Sixers move on from Paul George in the offseason. Because at this point, it's hard to imagine that Joel Embiid, even if he gets the knee taken care of now, right? Let's say he goes under knee surgery, whatever that surgery is. If it's a conventional surgery, none of those have worked to this point. So are you going to send him out somewhere to try an experimental surgery that's never been done on a big man before in the hopes that it's going to buck the trend of what happens to big men at this point in their career? I don't know. This is the part that pains me, because on a human level, Joel Embiid's made a lot of money. And so there are people who feel like, how dare you have any sympathy or any empathy for Joel Embiid? The guy has been through a lot in his career. We're talking about an navicular bone break. We're talking about that injury being the thing that ultimately dropped him to the Sixers in the draft. Otherwise, he would have been the number one overall pick out of Andrew Wiggins and Jabari Parker, but he falls to the Sixers. He misses his rookie season. His brother is killed in a tragic accident in Cameroon. So he loses that brother while he's stateside. You put that together with a bunch of other injuries. The Markelle Fultz shoulder to the face, the broken orbital bone. This guy has been through a lot. And you could say, hey, millions of dollars certainly take the pain out of the orbital bone fractures, or take the pain out of the meniscus tears, or take the pain out of whatever knee procedure he's going to have next, and the navicular bone and the back injuries. And to some extent you might be right, but he's a huge human being. And one thing that we know about big men is that as they age, they don't age gracefully. His rest of life, right? If his body is breaking down the way that it is to this point at his age, his age 60 and age 70 are going to look horrific, barring modern medicine just taking an incredible turn for big men. So on a human level, I feel awful for him. And at the same time, as a fan of the Sixers and as somebody who wants to see the Sixers win, I still think that their best option here is to get him a surgery, whatever that surgery is, in the hopes that it's going to bring you back 80% of what Joel Embiid was before. That then doesn't make him the number one option on this team, but it certainly is a valuable player to have on this team. And at some point, there's going to have to be a conversation about the weight and the size. How much of the issues that Embiid has had with his joints have directly correlated with the increase in weight? Now, sure, there's a benefit. There's a strength benefit. There's an in the post banging bodies kind of element to him having that additional weight and strength. But is there a case to be made that taking Joel Embiid down on the weight scale, making him back into not the gazelle that he was as a rookie, where he's lanky and it takes him 4 strides to run down the court, not that skinny Joel Embiid, but a slightly lighter Joel Embiid, does that help him return to MVP form? Does it help him return to 80% of what he can be for him? I don't know. But that update from Shams, on one hand, is wildly disappointing, incredibly disappointing. And on the other hand, it actually gives me a little bit of hope. It gives me a little bit of hope that this team has finally given up on this year, that they might shut him down for the rest of the year, that they might shut down Paul George for the rest of the year, and that they know their best case scenario is keep that top 6 protected first round pick. Which is where I get to, all right, on the Sixers side, if you're a Sixers fan, you're not going to watch a lot of winning. And the game against the Nets was very exciting up until the end. And then you get beat on a buzzer beater, and in my tanking heart, which is, it's still in here from years ago. It is nice to think about the fact that they might get to keep their pick after all. And maybe when you have that pick along with Tyrese Maxey and some contracts coming off the books, like maybe there is a way to rework this thing again. I will say, however, that I don't think Daryl Morey should be the guy to do it. I think Daryl Morey has been given enough time. He's been given enough shots at this with Joel Embiid. And yes, you can't control for Embiid's health, but Bob Myers' name has been floated out there. I would rather go with a guy who built a dynasty in Golden State than a guy who's never won jack diddly squat in Daryl Morey. I think that has run its course. I would move on. If I were the Sixers this offseason and Bob Myers is available, I would move heaven and earth. I'd bring Bob Myers in, and I'd say, you take the shot. We'll decide on what we're doing with Joel. We'll decide what we're doing with Paul George. Decide how you want to surround Tyrese Maxey with talent, and that's where I would go. Now, I think ultimately, if you got to a place where Joel Embiid is your second option on the team, whether it's Maxey becomes the number one, you got and you acquire through the draft, although I don't think there's a real number one. There's not like a generational prospect in this draft. If it's through the draft, if it's through free agency, to go out and get that number one option to pair with Maxey, could you see a scenario where a Joel Embiid a year or two from now is the third option, but a very, very good third option who can take over? Yeah, like you could win a title if Embiid is your second or third option, but remaining as the guy who the whole thing has to be built around, that will not win you a championship. I think that we have now seen that for enough years with enough supporting casts. I just don't think it's going to happen.